Hello, I'm Andy Brown, and I'm the editor of International Construction, and I'm joined by Chris Sleight, Managing Director of Off-Highway Research. And we're here today to discuss a new report that the company has put out. It's called the Global Electric Construction Equipment Industry, and it's a very comprehensive new 52-page report. So, Chris, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, my pleasure to be here, Andy. All well at Off-Highway Research.
Excellent. Well, as I said, it's a very interesting report. It's a very comprehensive report. I suppose my first question would be kind of why now for this kind of report? Is it that there's enough kind of details, kind of hard information available? Yeah, kind of why is now the right time for the report?
Yeah, sure. Just before we get into that, I just want to explain the kind of the rubric a little bit. So, what this report covers is types of construction equipment which have historically been diesel powered, but which now you can get electric variants. So we're not kind of getting into machines that have always been electric powered, like scissor lifts. It's
Hmm.
it's machines that we covered off highway research that are now going electric. So we looked at six types. We looked at compact track loaders, crawler excavators, mini excavators, telescopic handlers, wheel excavators, and wheel loaders. So to answer your question, this has obviously been a big trend for the last couple of years, and all our clients in the industry have been asking for this sort of information, and we have been looking at it for several years. I think, frankly, the reason for launching it now is we're only just getting to the level where the numbers of electric machines sold, and that's the key point, are really significant and measurable. Um, We've obviously seen a lot of shiny prototypes at shows like Bauma and Conexpo and Intermat.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we found is that the number of machines that are actually commercially available and generally sold in the marketplace are possibly, well, definitely a lot lower than you might be led to believe from strolling around a trade show and browsing press releases.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was going to be one of my questions was there does seem to be quite a kind of a striking difference between kind of how much electric equipment is spoken about in the industry and kind of what its kind of sales figures actually are. So I believe I'm right in saying that the report said there was a penetration rate of 0.9% in kind of markets where it was available. I mean, that's quite a, as you say, a big difference from if you're walking around a trade show and you see all these electric machines. There's quite a big difference between how much we're talking about it as an industry and what the actual figures are showing in terms of sales.
Yeah, that's right. We came up with a number of just under 7,300 electric machines in these six classes sold around the world last year. And the total market for all equipment in those types is just over 940,000. So that's 0.8, 0.9% in those six classes. And then if you looked at, kind of all earth moving equipment, which obviously includes other classes, the penetration rate is 0.6%. Um, I think the point there is, yes, obviously there has been a lot of publicity around the launch of electric equipment. I mean, quite rightly so. It's new. And it's frankly an industry which doesn't often do genuinely new things. And I think there are good reasons to shout about it. Um, but the other thing is, and again going back to the point I made about there aren't that many machines available. Um, those manufacturers which do have electric machines commercially available have, a couple of products, mostly in the compact equipment space. And then if you look at that electric offering compared to all the machine types in the construction equipment world and all the size classes in between, um, one of the barriers to adoption, frankly, is it is really hard to buy electric machines. Not all OEMs offer them, and those OEMs that do offer them, just kind of hitting one or two products out of a portfolio of a couple of hundred.
Hmm. Okay. So one of the other things that struck me from the report was just kind of what a big percentage kind of wheel loaders take up in terms of electric equipment sold kind of worldwide. So kind of could you give us an idea of this figure and kind of perhaps explain why it's quite so high?
Yeah, absolutely. So The the sales of electric wheel loaders last year were extremely high, and that was mostly down to China. So of that figure of 7,300 electric machines total, about 5,500 were wheel loaders. So that's wheel loaders of all sizes. In Europe, obviously, there's a focus on compact machines, but in China, the focus is on mid to large size machines. So if it was a diesel engined machine, it would be sort of 220 horsepower upwards, 5 to 7 ton capacity wheel loaders. So the reason for that is, China is a forerunner in electrification. These machines have been around for a while in China, and it is mostly the Chinese OEMs that are popularizing it. So historically, those companies made wheel loaders. That was their main thing. Although they all make excavators and mini excavators now, wheel loaders is kind of their core thing. And I think the other thing is that wheel loaders in that size class are actually quite good candidates for electrification. If you look at the applications they're used for, is things like mining and quarrying and industrial applications. So you're talking about permanent fixed sites. So a lot of the headaches around charging just go away because there's grid power available. So that makes it more feasible. The other point about those applications specifically is that the utilization on wheel loaders of that size class is quite high. So if you're paying a bit more for an electric machine, you get your payback quicker, and the benefits of lower total cost of ownership come a bit quicker. So that's really why it's been wheel loaders in China, because China's a forerunner, and that's a natural machine, and it's a good fit. I think the other thing I would say about the Chinese market is, because these wheel loaders have been fairly widely available for a couple of years, a lot of the understandable apprehension that customers would have been dealt with. You have electric wheel loaders in China running perfectly well with several thousand hours on them now. So the durability of the product and the number of battery charging cycles has been proven to be okay.
Okay, perfect. So just kind of keeping on kind of China then. Obviously, such a large market for electric equipment. I kind of wonder how much of this has kind of been driven kind of by the government, and if you guys have any stats about the cost of electric equipment, and kind of whether that's kind of falling and kind of coming, obviously still more expensive than traditionally powered equipment, but is that something that is kind of falling kind of year on year?
Yeah, so a couple of things to unpack there. First of all, there is a government push. The Chinese government has had a focus on air quality in its cities for some time, and it also has a carbon emissions reduction pledge. Essentially, it's aiming to reach peak CO2 by 2030 and reduce it thereafter. So they're starting now. And obviously, when the Chinese government wants to do something, it does get done.
Yeah.
So there are some incentives around. I think one of the issues which makes it hard to quantify is that different provinces and even different cities do things differently. So there have been some carrots and sticks for electric adoption. But as far as wheel loaders are concerned, the really interesting thing in China is that an electric wheel loader now costs the same, or possibly in some cases slightly less, than a diesel equivalent. And obviously in other markets that is not the case, where we see a price multiple of sort of 2.5 to 3 times.
Yeah.
The reason that's happened is, first of all, there's a big battery industry in China, from cradle to grave, really. So the availability and the price of batteries is lower. And the second thing in wheel loaders specifically is that we believe there are 30 or so OEMs supplying electric wheel loaders in China. So that includes the household names that you would expect. But we're also seeing newcomers coming into the off-highway world from on-highway. and having a crack at that market.
Uh-huh.
So China is fiercely competitive anyway, and it's gone that way very quickly in electric equipment. So with that many suppliers, it's driven the price down as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I know we don't want to get too much into kind of geopolitics and kind of things like that, but we've just kind of talked about China being kind of such a large market, and as you've kind of mentioned, China, having producing lots of electric equipment and kind of batteries as well. Kind of how damaging could kind of potentially kind of tariffs be in terms of the adoption of electric equipment if Europe or the USA kind of put tariffs on certain Chinese products?
Yeah, we see it as a problem. The tariffs that the US announced in May on battery electric vehicles, although they targeted the automotive sector, that included construction equipment and batteries in the definition. And electric construction equipment is therefore now subject to 100% tariff
Mm.
in the US if it comes from China. So that is a problem. It's not just a barrier for the Chinese OEMs. Because a lot of the battery industry is in China, quite a few of the international household names in this industry use their factories in China as the place that they manufacture battery electric equipment. So yeah, it's a problem. So that 2.5 to 3 times price multiple for electric equipment with 100% tariff goes to 5 to 6 times.
Yeah.
So say you were buying a mini excavator for, I don't know, a diesel machine for say $30,000. If you want to buy the electric equipment, that could be $180,000. So that blows it out of the water.
Yeah.
In Europe, there have been recent tariffs as well on Chinese electric vehicles, but that seems to purely focus on electric cars. Um, I would say it is quite a hard area to get a definitive answer because you have to wade through a lot of legal texts.
Uh-huh.
But from what we can glean from those texts, it doesn't include electric construction equipment. Having said that, there are trade tensions between Europe and China in the construction equipment world. Around the same time that tariff regime on electric cars was announced, there were some tariffs following an anti-dumping investigation in the powered access world.
Hmm.
So while electric construction equipment from China is not being specifically targeted and is not being singled out in Europe, you have to say that the direction of travel and the atmosphere is not good. And obviously, any tariff pushes up the price and is therefore bad for adoption.
Absolutely. Um, so my final question really, but if it's okay, I'll break it into kind of two parts. So kind of just if you could share with us some of your kind of predictions for the future for kind of electric equipment adoption, and maybe to start off with by looking at the equipment itself and whether kind of you kind of imagine other categories might become kind of more popular in the future. I'm thinking maybe the mini excavator. We've talked a lot about the wheeled loader, but do you see kind of other product categories perhaps increasing in the future?
Yeah, sure. So obviously here in Europe, the focus has been different. It's generally been on compact equipment. And if you look across, I mean, we believe that just over 2,000 electric construction machines were sold in Europe last year, and 90% of those were on the small side, so less than 10 tons operating weight,
Mhm.
and mostly really very much at the small end. So that's kind of the way Europe has gone and the way OEMs supplying Europe have gone. Um, we do question whether compact equipment is the way to go. Um, First of all, in Europe, it is rental companies that are the dominant buyer of that type of equipment. The argument for buying an electric machine is okay, you pay more when you buy it, but the running costs are lower, the maintenance requirement is lower. But if
Mhm.
you're a rental company, okay, you may benefit from a bit less maintenance, but you don't benefit from the lower energy costs because you weren't putting diesel in the machines you rented out. You're not charging the electric ones. So we see that as slightly problematic. Um, then you have the question of utilization. You know, mini excavators in Europe do a couple of hundred hours a year. You know, they're really very lightly utilized machines. So again, it's going to take a very long time for that payback to come. The other thing that kind of comes off of both their points is, you know, the overall point of doing this is decarbonisation. So if you're electrifying a machine that had a really small diesel engine and wasn't used much anyway, you're just not moving the needle on decarbonisation. So, you know, to a certain extent, why bother? And I think the other thing about things like mini excavators and compact equipment is, you know, charging is a headache. You know, charging is clearly a big pain point for the construction equipment industry in general. You know, some sites are obviously out in the forest, so where do you plug machines in? But actually, that's the minority of sites. But even in a city environment, you know, a lot of applications, a lot of things are things like street repairs and things like that. So, you know, you may have electricity around, you know, there are obviously street lights, there are cables to houses and premises, but you can't open up a street lamp and plug in your mini excavator.
Yeah.
So we kind of do see that as a bit of a problem. So, you know, I get it. You know, compact equipment is the more straightforward thing for OEMs to electrify because the power requirement is small. But I think the range of applications where that works as an electric machine is quite limited, because where do you plug it in? Is the person who buys it benefiting from the lower cost of ownership? You know, does the utilization drive any sort of payback? And are you winning on decarbonisation anyway? So, you know, flip all that on its head. What is attractive for electrification? Well, okay, first of all, you have to plug it in somewhere. So these applications like mines, quarries, industry, ports, where you have a fixed site and grid power, obviously makes sense. It also, if you're talking about battery electric, it also lends itself to machines that are a little more mobile and fast moving, because they kind of have to go to where the power is, rather than, you know, yes, there are these power bank kind of things which help with these charging headaches, but really you want the machine to be mobile and come to where it plugs in. If there are sort of static or semi-static applications, there may be a future for tethered plug-in electric equipment. But with battery electric, it needs to get to where the power is. Obviously, the person that buys the machine has to operate it or the party has to operate it. The other thing around that is you probably want to target customers that have made some sort of pledge about carbon reduction. And again, that does lend itself to mining and quarrying operators, you know, Lafarge Holcim, Cemex, companies like that. Those big multinationals have all made those pledges. But, you know, and again, going back to compacts, Dave, my local builder, who's going to use a mini excavator to dig the footings for my new garage, doesn't particularly have an annual report with a zero carbon pledge. So again, you know, target the companies that are serious about it, or target the subcontractors who work from them, and then therefore kind of have to follow on. I think that the final point to make is the biggest thing that we've seen in countries around the world that drives adoption is legislation. We touched on China, obviously, which is quite a mixed picture, but legislation is driving that way, and there is talk of scrappage schemes going forward. In Europe, the countries with the highest adoption rates of electric equipment are the Netherlands and Norway, where they have both legislation that, to some extent, in Norway's case, actually demand zero emission equipment, but they also have subsidies that go along with that. So we feel that, kind of organic adoption, is not quite there. The economic arguments aren't there, but if battery prices and machine prices come down and charging infrastructure moves on, we could get there. But clearly the places where adoption is going to be greatest is where the government is making it happen, ideally putting money behind it as well. But there tends to be, I think, a lot more stick than carrot in this industry. So they're obviously the places to target.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then so we talked before earlier on about that kind of penetration rate of kind of 0.9% in markets kind of where available. Where, I mean, obviously we've talked about there's a lot of different factors at play here, isn't there, in terms of, as you said, kind of different government kind of legislation and, you know, trade wars and the price of equipment and batteries coming down. But kind of where kind of does off-highway research kind of think that penetration rate might kind of get to in the next kind of, say, three to 5 years?
Yeah, very interesting question that. Forecasting is quite a mysterious art at the best of times, but in an industry like this, which realistically is only 2 or 3 years old and you haven't got much historic data to go on, you know, it's a lot more art than science. And the other point is, as I was saying, you know, outside factors do influence it a lot more than other things that are kind of more known and more predictable. So all that caveats and obfuscating aside, what we've said in our report is we see the market for electric equipment rising to somewhere between 30 and 35,000 machines by 2028, which would be a penetration rate of around about 3% in those 6 categories that we're looking at, or 2.5% in the market as a whole, as we expect it to be at that point. China will still be the biggest market, and it will all be about wheel loaders. We think in the Chinese wheel loader market, the penetration rate could be as high as 25% by then, because obviously we have seen uptake happen very quickly, and with what's happened with price in the last year or so, we can see things spinning very quickly there. So yeah, in terms of the value of the electric equipment market, last year we put it at just under $900 million worldwide. So we would see that rising to about 4 billion by 2028. Europe, you know, we would see adoption picking up. At the moment, it's about 1%. We see that rising to about 3%, so a little bit ahead of what we see as the global curve. Rest of the world is obviously kind of quite low. You're mostly talking about emerging markets, so you know they're in a different place anyway in terms of their journey. They're still not up to speed on emission laws. It may be that they leap a few things and go to electric. You're certainly seeing a lot of the Chinese OEMs, you know, pushing electric equipment in those markets. You know, again, mid-sized wheel loaders are the spearhead of that, and you can kind of see adoption working for the same reasons that it's worked in China. And obviously for the OEMs, there is a strategic aim here. You know, first mover advantage tends to mean you, as long as you don't mess things up, you're market leader until the end of time. So they do have an interest in doing that. The markets where we're not so buoyant are North America. So the tariff situation we've discussed. The other thing is most of the machines, again, being compact equipment. Not only are they compact equipment, but they are the size classes that work a little bit better in Europe than North America. So, you know, if you look at mini excavators, they tend to be 1 to 2 ton models. There is a market for them in North America, but it's not the big part of the market it is in Europe. In North America, it's sort of 2 tons and upwards that's interesting. And you can say some of the same things about electric telehandlers. So we see that as a problem. We obviously see the tariffs as a problem. There is a drive for electrification in North America. The EPA is quite positive about it, and obviously California tends to be the leader. And most of the market for electric equipment at the moment is actually in California. but you know, in a style that only the USA can do. Those organizations are leading, and everyone else is suing them. You know, other states are suing the EPA, and California business groups are suing. So it's getting ugly. You know, it's getting polarized and politicized, and that's just not helpful. So we're not that confident on. I mean, adoption rates will go up in North America, but we really don't see them taking off. I think that the final point on that in the North American market is that the dominant OEMs in there are not really the ones that have been really driving electrification. That's obviously been more a Chinese and European thing, and not really the big US manufacturers, although obviously they are looking at it and developing machines. And likewise in Japan, you know, there's not wishing to lapse into generalizations and cliches, but there is sort of an institutional conservatism in Japan. The Japanese market is absolutely dominated by Japanese OEMs, and they are shredding pretty softly, going fairly slowly. So yeah, it'll happen at some point, but it won't be quick in Japan. I think my final comment on adoption of electric equipment in general is, notwithstanding all the issues around legislation and charging infrastructure and price, one of the issues that we feel this industry has is that the pace of introduction of equipment is very slow. And from what we hear about OEMs' plans, it will continue to be slow. As I said at the start, electrifying this industry is an enormous task. You know, if you look at how many product groups companies offer, how many machine sizes there are within that, you know, it's a big job. And if companies are generally kind of at the moment launching 1 or 2 machines a year, it's kind of a 100-year job to electrify the whole portfolio. So for adoption to pick up, clearly there have to be more machines out there that you can buy.
Okay, perfect. Chris, thank you so much for your time. That was a really interesting chat on electric equipment.
My pleasure. Thanks for speaking with me, Andy.